And welcome to the One Shot Podcast. I get to lead us in today.
Yes.
Our guest today is somebody that's really special to me. We've got the Senior Director of Generosity. Encourage. I was thinking encourage. Senior Director of Generosity of the He Gets Us campaign, which has made a lot of headlines recently with their Super Bowl ads. We'll get into that here in a bit. But want to introduce, like I said, our guest today, Phil Boone, who has had a big impact on my life. And Tyler, I want to ask you something real quick. So back in middle school, can you think of a person, that kid that was like more athletic than everybody else, dated the best looking girls, everybody loved them, most popular? Can you think of anybody like that from back in your day?
Yeah.
So not only was Phil that kid, but he also raised a kid like that, which happened to be one of my best friends, still one of my best friends to this day. Shout out Jason. I know he's listening to this. So, I met Jason, Phil's son, back in middle school and been best buds ever since.
So I think Jason and Phil had a very different story than the one I'm thinking of in my head.
Yeah, so I definitely wasn't that kid, but I was led into the group by Jason, which I'm obviously always grateful for.
I've got to go on record here and say that Ben has no idea what he's talking about in my middle school days, because how would he?
Yeah, that's right, which we're going to get into that here in a minute. But I would say for sure, outside of my house, I spent 99% of my time at Mr. Phil Boone's house. He had the cool house, with the back game room, ping pong table, big screen TV. I mean, everything was there. So outside of my house, the most time I spent was at y'all's house.
Basketball court.
Basketball court. I mean, everything. It had everything. I'm assuming that was by design, by the way, to create the hangout house.
We wanted to be the house that everybody, all the kids came to.
Yeah. Well,
I love that.
It worked.
That's literally my wife's goal, and I had that conversation with my daughter yesterday. And like all my 11-year-old's friends come up and hug my wife, like, she's a buddy and friends. Yeah. And my wife said something yesterday. She was like, does that bother you that like all your friends are so close? Like, do you want me to take a step back? And she goes, no, like, I love that, like, our house is the place that all the kids want to be. She says, because none of the other houses that I go to, do I feel that way.
Yeah.
So I totally get it and appreciate that, because that's like our mission with our house and the projects that we have. And it's like, we want that space that people can come, and there's a reason, like that fellowship, that time. Plus, you can have your eyes on them.
That's right. Yeah. I'm sure that was a hidden agenda, perhaps. But really, I tell people all the time, the reason I didn't party, the reason I didn't get into drugs, things like that, the big reason is because none of my friends were doing it. Mm-hmm. And that was when we went to your house, that wasn't even a temptation for us. There was just so much fun to be had without that stuff. And so, again, I'm always appreciative of that. And I know it made a big impact on not only my life, but a couple of our buddies' lives as well. So appreciate you for that.
No, you're welcome. It was always a joy.
Yeah, absolutely. But and then secondary, so this is going to be special because of what you're doing now, but it's also going to be special for the listeners. But who cares about the listeners? For me personally, to learn a little bit more about your background.
Are you going to be here?
Yeah. To learn more about your background, because it's, I know bits and pieces just from things I've picked up over the years, but I'm excited to get to know where you come from and how you grew up and what ultimately led you to what you're doing today. So let's start there. I know you are from Abilene, correct?
Born and raised,
which is my hometown as well. So born and raised in Abilene. Pretty early on in life, pretty early on in life threw you a bit of a curveball.
Yeah.
With the passing of your father. Take us back to that, what that was like at such a young age and how that impacted you.
Yeah, great question. And obviously had a lot to do with my development. And so I'll start off. What people always think is kind of humorous is he was the principal at my high school. So that was his job. And so that was, usually great. I mean, I always loved that he was there, but sometimes he knew more than I really wanted him to know, that kind of thing, or he thought he knew more than he needed to know.
Yep.
So my junior year, I was 17.
Take your time. It's all good.
It's crazy. It was 45 years ago.
But why don't we go back to some younger times?
Yeah.
Let's go back to just kind of the dynamic of your house, siblings, what really kind of the foundation that you were about to dig into, the foundation of your family and what that was built on.
Yeah, great. So Christian home, both parents and both sets of grandparents. So raised in a home and a structure where we tried to make other people more important than ourselves. And so that's kind of what I remember from the very beginning. Even though, we all go through phases, and I was a big jerk at times and that kind of thing. But I remember from the very beginning, things like, don't ever try to be first in line. Don't ever try to, even though you're faster than the friend, don't beat everybody to the lunch line. Don't, always open the door for everybody. It was just that general deal that I was brought. I can't remember any other way than to always make everybody more important than ourselves, So it was just,
right? It's all about humility. I love it.
And of course, that action obviously made a huge impact on my life, but you have to go through the maturation process of truly learning what humility is.
How did you receive, you said you were a knucklehead sometimes, but how did you receive that in general? Because my parents instilled the same on us, but I remember vividly times when they'd want us to go volunteer and just not wanting to do it. Just I'm a dumb 12-year-old kid and selfish.
Yeah.
My friends.
I just want to go have fun. Like serving food, that's not fun. So how did you take it as a kid? Were you receptive to that? Were you?
Yeah. Oh, I was receptive as a young kid for sure. But then as, you get into the teenage years or early on, maybe, 12, like you say, 12, 13, 14, then you think there's obviously some things I'd rather be doing than what my parents are asking me to do. But my dad was so here's the way I describe him to people. He was the funniest guy in the room. He was the most competitive guy in the room. He was the loudest guy in the room. He was the biggest encourager in the room. He could go from 0 to 60 and turn as red as that book. Sorry, listeners, bright red. I mean, he was just intense, and his voice was also intense. So that's part of what, and hopefully listeners will hear today, is that, regardless of our upbringing, we all get a chance to do it differently. Mm-hmm. And my upbringing was incredible, but the thing that aggravated me the most about my father was the way that he never used profanity, never like that, but the intensity in his voice. There was a time when I pulled my belt off and I handed it to him and I said, "Would you just use this and stop talking?" Stop talking. And so he just had this intensity that he couldn't, he never reached the point where he could really control it at home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so there was a time, leading up to the time of his death. So when I turned about 15, I really started. He trained me. That's what I even ended up telling him. It was his fault. He trained me how to debate. He trained me. Here was his line. He said, "You may not be the fastest, you may not be the biggest, you may not be the smartest, but you will always be the best prepared, and you will outwork the next guy."
Amen. Amen.
What a lesson.
And so that serves you well most of the time, and that got out of balance a couple times in my life, always wanting to make sure I was the best prepared. And
so, it's very similar to that. Mm-hmm. I created an identity in that for a long time because I wasn't the fastest. I wasn't the most athletic. And my identity was the hard worker. Yeah. And it crushed me if I felt like, or if I failed and it was related to maybe like someone outworking me. Like it was this really, really hard deal. And then it's carried over to business where I put in, and Ben's the same way. It's like, look, we're like obsessive over putting in the work to where it can be detrimental when that becomes an identity issue. And I know obviously, right, your identity needs to be in one place.
Yeah.
It's very great to say, but the application of it, especially right, if you're groomed that way.
Right.
And that's a hard thing for me, even because I recognize, look, like, yes, work hard. Like those are all great characteristics. But when it becomes performance based and it becomes an identity, that's when it becomes a challenge. And I catch myself all the time doing the same thing to my kids.
Yes.
So how, and we're going to jump forward maybe a little bit, but then I want to come back to your journey. But like, how did you, as a father, take those lessons that your dad instilled into you, but then maybe with a little bit of wisdom recognize, okay, maybe just a slight adjustment in delivery and emphasis, like with my kids, what would I like to do?
Yeah. So my kids today, I ask them, they're 37, 35, and almost 33. And I'll ask them at times, what do you wish we'd have done differently? Could we have done this better or whatever? And one of the things that they pretty consistently say is, you really had us believing we could do anything we set our minds to do. And that's not, now they say, that was kind of a hard pill to swallow when we couldn't do everything. And of course, I come back to that and say, don't you think, I think I delivered that a little bit better than that. And maybe the way that you took it in was, we're both responsible here.
Kids do have a tendency to,
it's all your fault.
They hear, you can play in the NFL. And then they shut off. Yeah. They don't listen to the rest of the sentence.
Exactly.
Like, if you work hard, you prepare, you do that. Yeah, I totally get it.
So I guess what I would suggest, and I wish I'd have done even more of, but I did do some, was to say, after you instill something or you repeat something or you're really trying to work on something, to kind of sit them down and say, tell me what you think I'm trying to get you to understand. Repeat back to me what do you really think? Why do you think Dad wants you to do that? Why do you think Dad wants you to make other people more important than yourself? And because I really believe this, and you think about it, how many times can you remember an adult ever asking you to do something that you weren't already prepared to do? I think I'm not, now, don't hear me, I'm not saying put undue burdens on your children, but I am saying that children are always capable of more than what we realize.
Yeah.
So I encourage you to ask them and say, why do you think I'm asking you to do this? Or why do you think it's important for you to do this?
And I don't believe you mentioned, siblings? Do you have
one older sister?
One older sister. Yep. Okay. So your father was a principal of your high school, which also kind of means, yes, he has his two biological kids, but I don't know what the attendance was at your high school, but he has all of those other kids as well.
Yeah.
How was he with the ability to stay, okay, I can separate work from being present and being home with my family?
Yeah. So he glad you brought that up. One thing I didn't say a while ago is he was an incredible principal. He really was, both to his teachers and to the students. And he was, one of the things that made me the most proud was he loved the underdog. He was really good at that. So he loved, don't get me wrong, he loved the great students and the star athletes and all that kind of stuff. But he really worked hard to make sure that the underdogs felt not only appreciated but needed. And he was really good at that. His problem, again, was that intensity is he was not a good delegator, even though he had like 3 assistant principals. So back in the day, I can't remember, but it was the largest classification in Texas. Okay. Back then it was called 4A, which today is 6A, and you got 6-1A and 6AA or whatever. Yeah. But it was, I think my graduating class was 500 and 500 plus.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty big high school. But he, I never sat around thinking, why is my dad home tonight? I never had that thought, but he wanted to be everywhere.
Yeah.
He wanted to be at everything. Didn't matter what it was, band, science, whatever. He wanted to be there. And so once in a while, my mom would have to say, hey, that's enough.
Yeah.
And it led to part of his health problem, so he was not quite 46 when he died of a heart attack. And he had a warning earlier in that previous August.
Okay.
Went into the hospital. In fact, we were in the hospital at the same time. I dislocated my shoulder for the second time and was having a screw put in it back in my glory days. And so football. And so we were in the hospital at the same time. He was in there getting one of those tests where they put all that dye in you,
catheter
and
and all that.
and they look at your heart back then. So you got to remember, this is 1978, and open heart surgery was a big deal, not like today.
Yeah.
And sure enough, he had major artery blockage. But back to this deal again, you know, he knew his cardiologist was a friend, and he said we need to do open heart surgery. So this was think about this, third week of August. So school is about to start, and my dad goes, I can't have open heart surgery. And the cardiologist said, well, why not? He said, because school starts next week. He goes, I can't do that. And he goes, Phil, you don't have a choice. It's Phil Sr. He said, you don't have a choice. And he said, surely I've got a choice. Let's talk about this. I mean, my dad was good at this, man. And he'd go, let's just talk about options. And so finally he convinced his cardiologist that he could wait until the next summer, if, and there were three stipulations. Take your medication. They put him on new medication. Change your diet. My dad was probably 30-ish pounds overweight. Okay. And exercise. Well, he claimed
even with a heart problem, they wanted him to exercise.
Yeah,
at that
they
point?
weren't walking. I mean, they wanted him to not strenuous.
Got it.
And so he was convinced that he exercised every day, walking all over campus. There were 2 floors at Abilene High, 2 stories. He walked up and down the stairs. Not
wrong. I mean, he's getting his steps in.
Yeah, more than I walk every day.
So maybe he did a little bit of that. He didn't change the way he ate. And my mom and I joked later that she's gone to glory too, but my mom and I joked later that maybe he took his medication. And so he just didn't know how to turn it off.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so he passed away a couple of months before his 46th birthday. But it was almost, looking back, it's almost like he prepared me for it. Mm-hmm. So my mom and I reversed roles after he died for about 10 years. She didn't handle it well, and kind of went into, she had some depression challenges, and ended up doing really well later, but it took about 10 years. So
was their marriage where your dad handled everything, like finances, bill, like all of that, he handled it?
Yep.
So there was that transition.
Yep.
That she was, I mean, different times. So it's not like I don't know my email password. You didn't have to deal with that stuff, but like banking and all of that. So you had to step in and assume that role at that age, at 17.
Yeah.
What did your mom do for a living?
She was a piano teacher.
Okay.
So, and she actually taught in the public schools too. Remember when you had music teachers in elementary school? She was a
See, I live in Salina. We still have music teachers, which is awesome.
That is
a throwback.
Yeah, we still have it. I don't think it's every day in Prosper, but they have it a little bit.
Really?
So you say you had to, you and your mom switch roles. So did you have to contribute financially as well? Did you have to work and contribute that way?
I didn't in high school. Mm-hmm. That it was sufficient at that point in time. But as young married couples, Patsy and I actually had to help my mom financially.
What was that like? Take us back to the mentality of now at 17 having to step up and be the leader of the house.
You know what? Sometimes I wonder today, like I said a while ago, it's been 45 years. And I have a date on my on my phone that comes up and reminds me. Sometimes I wonder, I've never sat down with a professional counselor, and I probably should.
That's what we are. We're professional.
Yeah, great.
We're
tell us about it.
Not very good ones.
Can I lay down on the couch?
We took an online course.
University of Phoenix.
Because I think I've dealt with all that, but here's my answer to your question. You know what? I look back and it doesn't seem like, it just seems perfectly normal and natural. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, I want to say that maybe it was a blessing in disguise that I had to step up like that. Mm-hmm. So my sister was graduating from college that same semester, and she wanted, she needed to go on, start her life, and I didn't want her feeling like she needed to stay in Abilene, and so she moved to Dallas, Irving specifically. But I never felt burdened by that or like I was missing out. Mm-hmm. I really didn't. And part of that was my mom was really awesome. Even though she was hugely dependent on me, she also gave me a great deal of trust and had a lot of confidence in me.
What did you dream about before this incident that you wanted to do one day, and did it change? Did it alter at all after that happened?
Oh, I'm like you guys. I thought I was gonna be, choose between the NBA and the NFL and water skiing at Cypress Gardens in Florida. You know.
Tyler, you don't know. This dude still could rip it up behind a boat to this day, for sure.
Well, anyway, I loved it so much as a kid that was kind of my first real dream, was I was going to be a professional slalom skier. But anyway, what's interesting, again, the way God weaves things together is I was going to leave Abilene. Growing up in Abilene, I was not going to go to ACU, even though I had generations of fourth or fifth generation. No, I would have been third generation, I guess, at the time. But and then that just wasn't going to happen after my dad died. I needed to stay locally and to be there for my mom. And so, but that's where I met my wife of almost 40 years. And the rest is history. Yeah. What I was going to tell you a while ago was that my dad, the thing, if you said, well, what was the one thing you wish you could have changed? And it was that intensity in his voice. But as we all know, even though I swore I would never be like that, when as a young husband and a young father, that was my greatest struggle, was the intensity in my voice. And even though I talked to Patsy about it and, ahead of time, and we talked and all that kind of thing, even with all that, it was still a struggle for me as well. And so I can vividly remember, and like I was telling you a while ago, I think kids are more capable than we realize. Now, not a 1-year-old, because my kids were, they were like 5, 3, and 1, and I literally sat them down on the floor one night and with Patsy and kind of confessed to them and apologized. I don't remember now what, obviously I lost my temper or something and used my voice the way I shouldn't. And so I sat them down on the floor, apologized to all of them, and they reacted well. And obviously, I don't know that Jason and Braden knew what I was talking about, but Carly did.
Yeah. But either way, that's your point on kids can handle and they can accomplish more than we give them credit to.
Yep.
And have become such helicopter parents and don't play in the street and don't do this. But the giftings that they're given at birth are astounding, and grace is one of them. That you don't think that something as complicated as grace can be, especially as we're older, right? And what they're capable of giving, if you just ask for it, if you just ask your kids, and we always think we've got to be an authoritative position, and you've got to submit to us, and we'll direct, but man, like the teaching them to give grace, and it takes practice, like giving grace. So start them early. And I love that at that early age you started that.
Yeah, I had a funny father failure moment the other day on this topic. My oldest son, my 6-year-old, yelled at my 3-year-old. I don't even remember what the argument was about, and so I sent my 6-year-old to his room, and as he was going up there, I said, hey, we need to work on, how we speak to each other and not yelling and, being calm and when things upset us. And so he goes up to his room and comes down later on that day. Something happens. He wasn't listening, and so I yelled at him. And the first thing that comes out of his mouth is, I thought we were working on not yelling at each other.
Got him.
Ooh. So they listen to everything that you say, for sure. They may not do it, but they'll listen.
So this is true question is, when dealing with kids and not listening, we tend to speak louder and more intensely.
Mm-hmm.
So if a child or children struggle with that, how do you get them to hear you, or maybe that's not our job to get them. It's just something that my wife comes from an Italian family. She's very loud. So yelling's kind of normal. And like, that's just kind of become the norm. But to your point, Ben, is my 11-year-old, who is unbelievable. Like, we are so blessed with her and like her maturity and just her heart and all that. But like, she becomes the mom too, and sounds exactly like my wife with the other kids, yelling at them and getting them. So how do you get through to kids without yelling if that seems to be the only way that they actually respond?
Dr. Phil.
As simple as this sounds, you have to kind of do the opposite. And so you have to, first of all, you kind of have to remove them from, if you can. I know you can't always do that. But if it's possible to remove them from whatever they're doing, I mean, just for a minute, get them and take them to another room. If you're in the car, man, one of the most powerful things is gently, don't jerk over to the side of the road, but, find a place to pull over and literally stop and get them only out of the car.
Ooh.
Oh, that's a good one. Okay.
I do like
Tell me
that.
more.
I like that because that's a change of
That'll get some
of
attention.
pattern right there.
Just calm. I mean, it's a little harder to get off of some of our roads in Dallas than it is others, but it's all calm and then it's all attention is on them. They'll hear you.
Yeah. Of your three, just side question, which one earned more of those talkings than the other? Did any of them stick out?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I wasn't always as good as I just described. Braden, the young, he was the most obstinate.
Was he?
Yeah, up through, maybe to today, but I'm sure Braden will be listening. Love you, son. No, he was the one that kind of would talk back the most. Jason was our, emotion. He got, poor guy, he got my emotions in a lot of ways, but he was just real easy to discipline. He was so sensitive.
I can see that.
And it's so, what's the word I'm looking for? He wanted to please everybody.
Yeah.
But he was the one that was hardest to get his attention. You're talking about,
Really?
Oh, yeah. Oh, dude. He was just all over the place. I'm talking about as a, prior to 10.
Right.
10 years
Young
old.
kid, yeah.
Oh, my gosh. His motor was so fast, and he was just, oh, my. He was hard to get his attention. Yeah. So that's why sometimes you just have to, remove them from the situation to get their attention. One of the greatest things that ever happened to me was Carly did to me when she was like 3 years old. So I come home, I used to, back to the work ethic and the performance. I would leave in the mornings before they ever woke up. And then I would take my stuff to run, and I'd run at whatever time. And then I'd usually, most of the time, I'd tell Patsy, I'll be sitting down at the dinner table at 6 p.m. Okay, that was kind of my deal. But I got in one night, and it was during March Madness. I remember this like it was yesterday. And we had a TV that was kind of closer to the floor, just because of the way the wall was structured. And she wanted to play this after dinner. She wanted to play Candyland. I can remember it. And so I set Candyland down on the floor with her back to the TV where I can look over her and watch March Madness. Literally.
I know.
Is that horrible or what?
No, not at all.
So we're playing.
Very brilliant, actually.
Sounds efficient.
I'm taking notes, actually.
So we're playing Candyland, and she gets frustrated with me. She's like, "It's your move, go, Dad," or whatever. Finally, she gets up, walks around the little card, whatever the play surface, and she takes my face in both of her hands, little 3-year-old hands, and she says, "Daddy, you look at me when I talk to you." Talk about a stab in the heart.
Man.
So it's one of the greatest things that ever happened to me.
Oh.
Not only in raising my kids, but also in just, talking to you guys, visiting with people that, people get it in a hurry if they know you're not engaged.
Oh, for sure.
And so it's so rare, truthfully, anymore, that when you really engage with somebody and you demonstrate that you're wanting to hear what they say, you're a rock star.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
And I love that call out, because that's a trait people don't put enough emphasis on as important. I just think of how it makes me feel when I recognize that internally. And then, you know, the feedback that you do get from other people, like, hey man, like, you know, there was 50 people in the crowd and I literally couldn't take my eyes off of you because you were engaging with me just non-verbally. Like how important that really truly is, because that does impact people. You don't have to say a word.
Yeah.
You just have to engage.
That's a good lesson. I want to take a quick break and thank our partners, Sleep Number, and highlight a couple of things they're doing. Guys, these Sleep Number beds are unreal. The technology that they've created, the feedback that it gives you on your sleep. I've got the app opened up right here. They tell you things like your heart rate variability, your breathing rate, all these type metrics and feedback to give you so that you can improve your quality of sleep. They're all over the place. You can go and check yourself out at Sleep Number store wherever you live. Go to sleepnumber.com as well. They've got great resources on there. We just talked about this not too long ago. They have a whole blog section, all these articles, things that you can improve your health. Sleep Number is definitely changing the game when it comes to bedding. So get yourself to Sleep Number, get yourself to sleepnumber.com and check them out. Now back to the episode. So you mentioned Miss Patsy Boone, who, like you, has massive heart for people and just loves people. How did y'all meet? Take us back to that. Did you have game back in the day? Like, did she come to you? How did that go down?
You know what, Ben? I'm not going to let you bait me into that conversation. So actually, her older brother introduced us. So I'm indebted to her older brother always for introducing us.
That's saying a lot.
Yeah. So yeah, he
in school at ACU.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he was my big brother in our fraternity, and we hung out one night later than we should have, and I guess I can say on this telecast over a 6-pack of beer, and just talked late and early into the morning, and the next day he just came to the conclusion after that conversation that I needed to marry his little sister.
Wow.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
Because usually, I mean, I've never had a sister, but it's usually the protection mode.
My sister's 10 years younger than me, and she just got married 2.5 years ago. And I love him, but it's still, are you good enough from a baby sister?
You must have been engaged in the conversation, listening well.
Yeah.
Wait till it's your daughter.
Yeah. Both daughters.
I know.
No doubt.
It's 40 years from now. It's going to come up quick.
So a little inside baseball here. Abilene Christian, where both of us went to school, they don't have fraternities. They're called social clubs. And the male social clubs, the bad boys of the school, is a club called Sub T16. And that's what. So this buttoned up gentleman that sits here in front of us today wasn't always so. He was you were a subber back in the day.
I tell people we're poster boys for the power of the Holy Spirit.
That's awesome. So anyway, meet Miss Patsy. Y'all get married when?
After my senior year, but after her junior year. So she had another year.
That's
really how I got started in
That's
business
kind of the rule at Abilene is you do have to get
ring
married
by
in
spring.
college.
That's right. That's right. Same story with me. I was just graduated. My wife was still in school. It's more common than you think. There, for sure.
I believe it.
So y'all stayed in Abilene until she was done.
Yep.
What were you doing for a living?
I started a life insurance business.
Started one.
Yeah, I started in the life.
Oh, I thought you said you started a life insurance.
No.
I was about to say, that's
And
impressive.
greatest discipline, man, is the best. I'm so thankful now that I did. I had an old college football coach that started recruiting me when I was a freshman, and I was like, dude, I'm gonna go sell commercial real estate. I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna move to Dallas. I'm gonna go do this. Well, then Patsy's a year younger than me, and her dad says, if you'll let her finish, I'll finish paying for it. And I said, deal. So I got started in the life insurance business in Abilene. And my grandparents had lived, my mom's parents had lived there forever. My dad, as I told you, was a high school principal. So it's kind of like I didn't know everybody in town, but I felt like I did.
Yeah.
And so I just, Patsy says that it was miserable for her. We had this little bitty 1-bedroom apartment that first year I was in the business. And on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday nights, man, I was calling people at night because most people initially that I could call on, they had to work all day.
Yeah,
they couldn't have a meeting with a guy,
Yeah.
During the day. They were working hard because they were younger people initially. And so I was calling people on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday nights trying to set meetings for the next Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday nights. And she remembers that of just being like, oh, it was awful because, I'd get so many no's or not get them or whatever. I don't have that memory. I mean, I have the memory of going, man, I am better at this than anybody that's ever done it, you know.
Which makes you the perfect person for that job.
Yeah, and I also liked kind of trying to distinguish myself a little bit and not be the stereotypical, you know, sales guy that everybody can't, you know, that runs from when they see me coming.
Perspective for those listeners that are, let's just say 32 and younger. So before you were born or when you were very young, there was this thing on the wall called the telephone. And so there wasn't email, there wasn't cell phones, there wasn't pagers even. It was, hey, I have to catch you when you're in your house and tastefully not during family dinner time. So you've either got a window from like 4:45 to 5:30, 4:45 being a little bit early because people actually used to work full days back then. So you really got like 6:30 to 8. Otherwise, after 8 o'clock, it's too late, right? Now you're into like, so you had a very small window that you had to concentrate those sales calls into. How did you handle, I mean, I know your wife said, but how did you handle no's? Like, I know you don't remember them, blacked out whenever I said no, but handling rejection, how, because some people are wired where it doesn't bother you and it just do on to the next one. Me, it crushes me. Like I hate no's. I hate them because I feel like it's an attack on me as a person. I can't separate that.
Yeah. Well, I read the books. I listened to the motivational speakers. And so honestly, when you first asked that question, it immediately popped in my head. Getting a no just means I'm one call closer to a yes.
Yeah.
That's a good mentality.
I know that
mentally tougher than I am, for sure.
I don't know if this is just a cultural, like a modern cultural thing, or if this was a struggle for you and your generation. You know, you had these dreams of being a professional athlete. That didn't work out. Now you're sitting here cold calling people at 8:30 at night on a Monday. Was there any sense of, this is just not what I want to be doing at all?
Well, first of all, let me tell you that, and I mean this when I say it, I've never made a cold call in my life. So if I don't know the person I'm calling, like right now with He Gets Us that we're going to talk about, I'm calling on a lot of people that I don't personally know, but I'm never going to call somebody that I don't already have someone else. And my goal is to have someone else that loves them.
Yes.
And that they love.
Yeah.
And so back to your question, though, I don't feel like I've ever made a cold call. Yeah. Now I have, just because I couldn't figure out how to get to somebody that I wanted to get to.
Yeah.
But it's not wise. Yeah. I mean, the success rate is very low.
Yes.
You know, Ben, I never really felt like, you know, why did my dad die, and why did I not be able to move to Dallas when I wanted to, and why am I doing you know why I started in the life insurance business? This is why. I had a finance degree, and I turned down some of the old commercial real estate guys. If anybody's listening to this, you know, back in the day, everybody went to work for Trammell Crow. Trammell Crow was the largest real estate company in the world. I didn't know what Trammell Crow was. I got offered a job to be the leasing guy for a new bank building in Abilene, Texas, as the leasing agent. I didn't know what that was. And I was back to the deal. So there were advantages to having to step up and be in charge, but there are also disadvantages. I thought I knew everything. I didn't ask advice of men and women, but I didn't ask advice like I should have in my early 20s. I just was too arrogant and, you know, thought, hey, I've been running this show. I don't need to ask anybody. I turned down an offer to work for Trammell Crow because I didn't investigate what it was.
That's like turning down a job from Tesla today.
So anyway, the reason I went into life insurance really in the beginning and sales is because I didn't have any money and I wanted to have my own business. And so I figured the quickest way to build capital in my world was through sales. I dreamed at one time I was going to go to law school and I was going to be the best, you know, courtroom attorney in the world. You know? And, but I fell in love, and law school seemed like, you know, remember when you used to think 3 years was a long time?
Yeah.
I thought, man, there's no way I'm going to go to law school. I got to get out
3
and make money.
years.
And I was broke. I mean, I worked every summer. I worked most semesters in college. That's when I started roofing houses. And that I fell in love with getting paid for what you produce.
Yes.
Instead of other way around.
Yeah, you talk about that a lot, Tyler. The business we're in, there's not an obvious progress at the end of each day.
Yeah.
Like there is in roofing, for instance. So you've talked about that of you would, it'd be nice to have a job where you can see measurable progress each day as opposed to.
It's like subjective gains. It's you can't measure it technically. Yeah, you can chart it, you can measure, they can say, okay, hey, progress here, progress, like you can do all that. But you could also do all of that and get to final, like what we do, lease execution or closing of a property, and literally it could fall apart. And all of that was for nothing.
Right.
As opposed to, all right, I know this job is going to take 2 days. Day one, okay, I got 3/4, I got everything ripped off, I got everything sheeted, and I got half the shingles on, and I got to come back, finish up the trim, finish up all the gutters, boom, done, pay me. And it's done.
Yeah.
As opposed to, all right, we're going to spend 4.5 years on this project hoping that it finishes.
Right.
And so that's for us, we do talk about just the challenge in that. Hopefully you've got it's a challenge. So I agree on the sales side. The other great thing, and Roger Staubach told me this, I was lucky enough to sit down with him as I was retiring, was like the sales side, brokerage, what we do is you can get an education while making a good living. Whatever you want to do on the other side of this, but sales is the fastest way to, one, create a network, two, get education in whatever field that you're working in, and then three, make a good living for your family.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's maybe fast forward just a little bit. You start having kids, and then eventually y'all end up moving to Austin for ministry, if I'm not.
That's what it ended up being, but we moved a company there.
Okay.
Yeah.
The life insurance company?
No, Pat's
We jumped way
We're
too far.
We're going to jump
back.
Maybe we jumped way too
No,
far.
it's okay. Let's do jump there. But Pat, the reason I was grinning is Patsy says I've had more jobs or careers than anybody she knows of, and we've moved more. And all.
Sure.
But truth is, whenever I come to a point where I feel like I'm not really providing great benefit for whoever I'm around, or I'm not enjoying who I'm with, working with, life's too short.
Yeah.
And so I just never have let that.
It's like
keep
you got
me.
one shot at life to take it.
Heard that somewhere.
I weasel that into
Heard
every
that
single
phrase.
episode.
Heard that phrase somewhere. So then what
We
led
moved,
you to?
we moved the company to Austin, a company that I had done I wrote some curriculum called strategic accountability. And so I'd work with companies with their management team, basically set a 3-year plan and then back it up to what needed to be done in the next 12 weeks. And then I would go in every 12 weeks and basically use the greatest thing in the world, which is positive peer pressure.
Yeah.
And in front of you, I would say, so Tyler, did you get XXX? Did you get this done? And in front of your management peers, you'd have to say yes or no, or why we didn't hit that target or whatever. So the companies that did it, they loved it. It changed. It really made them effective. Well, one of those companies made me an offer I couldn't refuse, and they were moving a company to Austin and wanted me to be in charge of their sales. So that's why we thought we moved to Austin.
Gotcha.
But the truth is, long story short, you can ask what you want to, but we ended up actually starting a church in the beginning it was just men. I mean, women could come, but it was for men transitioning from the state penitentiary back to free society. And Ben knows this, my kids were in the beginning. So this would have been when they were I'll just take Carly and then subtract 2 years on each boy. But she was in the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So for almost 4 years, pretty much 4 years, almost every Sunday, we were with men and women that had been in the state prison, and that's who we worshiped with, and it was unbelievable. We saw the best of the Holy Spirit and the worst of the evil spirit. And so the kids, they saw it all, and they felt like if they weren't there, that it wasn't going to go right, because they were passing out sheet music, and it was the most incredible experience. I mean, I don't like to ever look back and go, this is the greatest thing that ever happened in my life. But I will tell you that the effects that the Freedom Church, that was the name of it, the effects the Freedom Church had on my family, there's nothing else. I mean, my kids are, I'm not going to say they're completely colorblind, but they're pretty close as a human can be. They have, and it's because of that experience, both, ethnic diversity, economic diversity, educational diversity, all those things. My kids, my kids love everybody, and that's by the grace of God.
Yeah, we talk about this a lot because the areas that we live now are the majority of the community looks like us. Mm-hmm. Young families, same sort of income level, and so and I was not raised that way. Neither were your kids in the way you raised them. And that's one of my, well, there's a lot of big things that I think about, but that's one of my biggest things is how do I teach my kids? How do I expose them and give them perspective? So how important is that, do you think, for a young person to get early in life? Is that perspective? And obviously you implemented that through the Freedom Church, but talk about a little bit more about how that important that was for your kids to not just hear about it, but actually live it, experience it, see it. And it's obviously impacted them today.
Well, you've asked me a question that most people don't like to hear the answer to, and I'm going to tell you, Ben, that it's maybe the third most important decision that you'll make is how to get your kids exposed to the real world. Unless they have the perspective, or you have the perspective that your goal is to live in that bubble for all your life. And if that's the goal, then that's okay. But otherwise, the truth is, I could give you all kinds of statistics of how many languages are spoken in Dallas, Texas today. I could give you, perspective on all kinds of things. We don't need to get that in, but the bottom line is the world doesn't look like us, doesn't talk like us. Now, in the economic world, English is still the dominant language. So, it honestly, it depends on your priorities. It depends on what you think is most important for your kids as they become adults. And I'm not saying it's a right or wrong answer, but I will say that you need to decide kind of what your priorities are in that respect, because if you don't, then by not making a decision, it'll,
make a decision.
That's right.
That's right.
That's good. So you mentioned that was those 4 years were some of the best years that you can recall back on. You ended up moving back to Abilene after that. Why leave if those times were so amazing? You're going to think I planned this. So it was because we lived in an area that was a resort 24/7, and everybody had a ton of money, or they acted like they did, one or the other. And again, that's fine. But our daughter came home she was about to be a freshman in high school, and she came home from a slumber party and basically just said, I don't want my brothers going to high school here. Wow. She said that.
She said that.
Wow.
As a 14-year-old. And so anyway, but also in addition to that, Patsy and I had been praying about how did we want to put the kids in an area where there was more ethnic and economic diversity. Mm-hmm. And so we moved back to Abilene because, as you know, it has all that. That's right. And so that's why we moved back. Literally, that was like in July of that summer. And so,
how old were the kids at that time?
Going into freshman year of high school, going into seventh grade, and going into fifth grade.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Those are some pretty important times.
Those are. I mean, those are tough transition years.
Yeah.
How did Carly, and if you don't want to share, that's fine.
No.
How did your kids in general? That's a tough time to move.
Yeah. They absolutely loved our time in the Austin area. And like I say, the Freedom Church was a huge part of that and their development. They probably didn't know it at the time, but that was just so huge in their development. They did well because of, made friends pretty quickly. And Carly was, as they I said back then, I guess they still say she was a baller.
Yeah.
She was a big time baller as a freshman, and started making the varsity as a freshman and all that in three sports. Yeah. So until she could drive, I was always up in the parking lot at 2 a.m. in the morning waiting for her to get home. Because she was embarrassed to ask the older girls to give her a ride home. Yeah.
Think about that. The biggest school, one of the biggest schools in the state, and she was a baller. Carla Boone's a legend back in Abilene, and 3-sport varsity starter or star as a freshman. I mean, that's big time. That's big time.
She wasn't a starter her freshman year of volleyball, but she was moved up to the varsity. But awesome. Yeah, she graduated with 9 varsity letters. She'll be so mad at me if she listens to this. Yeah. She was a baller, man.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's great. So moved back to Abilene, and when did you pick back up working for
work-wise? So
Abilene Christian.
So when you left Austin, okay, so I want to go back to Austin. You were working sales when you got there. Did you stay with that, or were you full-time ministry? Were you still working?
I stayed with that. I ended up being the CEO of that company.
Okay.
And
so you moved the headquarters back to Abilene.
No, I actually
we see that more than you'd think.
Yeah, I actually ended up resigning from that company, and then I'd gotten into really raising capital for startups. That in the late '90s in Austin, Texas, that was like the Silicon Valley of Texas. I mean, it was crazy, and so I got into that world, raising money, and got into it, by the way, through relationships that I made through my kids. My kids' sports. I was on the board of the youth association and met so many great people that were, they were just starting businesses right and left. And so that's kind of what I was doing. And then it didn't matter where I lived because I was doing it in Austin, Abilene, Midland, Dallas. And so that's why we could move back to Abilene.
Abilene was actually a perfect spot for that.
Yep. Kind of centrally located.
So drop a little life knowledge as you've been doing this whole time in regards to money.
Yeah. Because
you've been rubbing elbows with high net worth individuals for a long time. You did well yourself, obviously. Talk to us about, because I remember, and it actually happened, within the last couple of years, that switch in your mind when money doesn't do what you think that it does. It's not as fulfilling. It's not as, again, I don't want this to sound ungrateful. Obviously, I'm grateful for the job that I have, but I had played it up so much in my head of what this was going to do to my life. Mm-hmm. And when it didn't do that, it was kind of a punch in the face for me. And again, good problem to have. But with all your experience, all your time in that world, what was that like for you? Did you ever have an aha moment with it as far as this isn't as fulfilling as I thought it was going to be? Did you have that experience at all?
Yeah, I'll edge that 2 ways. So the first time I had that was so I was 27 years old, and believe it or not, you guys, the 401ks were not a thing until like 1985. So in 1987, when I was 27, I was a kind of a dangerous combination. I was a life insurance salesman, but I'd also gotten my Series 6 and Series 22 licenses, and so I could sell a lot of things or help people invest their money. And so I was going and calling on CFOs of companies and helping them set up 401k plans for their employees.
Benefits,
for their benefits, and then selling product inside it.
Yeah.
And so in 1987, I made more money than I ever dreamed I would make. And my first aha was how fast that I spent it. Mm-hmm. I mean, we invested some and we did some things, but it was just like, it's gone. What happened?
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the first aha. Uh-huh. And back in the late 80s, so many of y'all won't know what this means. Back in the late 80s, I'd learned in college to diversify. And so we invested in oil and gas. We invested in banks. We invested in real estate. We invested in a restaurant chain, which I knew was stupid, but we did a restaurant chain. And in the late 80s is when the whole banking industry and real estate, it went bust.
Yeah. Yep.
And if only by the grace of God, seriously, I almost invested too much of our net worth in those things, or otherwise it would have been real close to filing for personal bankruptcy because we had invested in several things that didn't do well. And I didn't make that much money. When I say more money, I mean, to me, it was more money.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's
And
all relative.
in 1987. So that was my first aha, is just how quickly it goes. And so that was a really great, I'm thankful for that lesson. You know, Ben, I don't think there's another, Tyler, I don't think there's another time that, you know, some specific event. It's just as you know, as your kids, as you start having, when they're teenagers and you start having adult conversations, so to speak, with your kids and realizing how important those things are, and your friendships. I heard a guy say the other day that, Bob Bodine, shout out to Bob Bodine. He said that men don't do very good at making friends when you're trying to build your businesses, your careers, because you're so busy. And he said, if men don't get good at making friends, well, like real friends, before they're 60, that after 60, they don't even try.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, I got to that by just saying that I think life just, well, if you stop every now and then and decide what your priorities are, then as you mature in life, amounts of money become less important.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's good.
Yeah. So like the cliche phrase, like time is money. You yourself have seen professional success within your network. Same, right? A lot of individuals that have had professional success. One thing I think even Ben and I struggle with sometimes is the amount of time we'll spend on something for someone else. And this, it started with me when I was playing, and I used to get asked to speak at like FCAs all the time. And it got so bad to the point where I don't know who gave my number out, but now the kids started trading my phone number. So like every elementary school or high school or junior high, these kids would be calling, ask if I could come speak there. And especially that, right? You're like, I can't say no to that. Like, you just share my testimony. Like, I can't say no to that. But the director of the FCA, he pulled me aside, and he's a good friend back in the Clovis area. And he said, listen, like, you've got to charge them. They've got to value your time. So for someone that has done so many things over your career and seen and met and worked alongside so many other people, what is your advice on valuing the time that you put into certain things?
yeah, man, that's a great question. So I'll give you one example. Answer was only about, so fast forward back to Abilene, I ended up raising money for Abilene Christian University. So all the way from, I started off directing a big centennial campaign. So this was 2003. So for about almost 20 years, 19 years specifically, I helped raise money for ACU. And so that did put me in the, I mean, when you think about it, it's one thing for somebody to make millions of dollars. It's another thing for somebody to give away millions of dollars. And so it's a whole nother echelon and level, not only of financial strength, but also of generosity. I mean, it's just really, I mean, I've had such a blessed career in that respect of being around people that have that kind of generosity. And so, you know, I forgot where I was headed with that. What was your specific question?
Yeah, more of like, time is money.
Oh,
making
yeah,
sure you
So over the years, I would do almost back to that deal of making people more important than yourself. So if you asked people, say, why do you think Phil has been successful at raising money? My wife would say, who knows me better than anybody, she would say it's because people know that Phil truly cares about them and their kids and their grandkids. Well, I wouldn't have said that, but she said that. It's been years ago now. And so praise God. I mean, she's right. I just didn't know it came out as well as it did. So I'm getting to answer your question. So I would, man, there's no telling how much money I've helped other people make just because I've introduced them to people.
Yeah.
And about 6-8 years ago. And so the reason my goal was I want to make everybody more successful. But when I was raising money for ACU, I was wanting to make people more successful that could give more money to ACU.
Yeah.
So, that power of reciprocity. And so that's why I would do it. But about 6-8 years ago, a good friend of mine said, hey, man, when you do that, like I've raised seed money. I've helped people raise seed money for companies that have gone on to be worth millions and millions of dollars. And he's like, I know you do that to help people give more money to ACU, but when are you going to do a little bit of that for your own family? And I was like, and then I went through this whole deal of feeling guilty and feeling like a conflict of interest or whatever else. And he finally helped me realize. So now, back to your example of the kids getting your phone number, when people call me and ask me, they'll say, hey, can you introduce me to so-and-so? Well, obviously, first thing I say is, well, what do you want to talk to them about? And they'll say, can I get their cell number and email? And I'll say, well, let me talk to them. I'll talk to them first and I'll let you know. So I've always done that.
Yeah.
Always. But now if I know if it's about raising capital, then I say, I give them a percentage and I say, well, if I'm going to help you do that, I'm not going to the meetings, but if I'm going to put you in front of them, then this is what
the relationship. And that's what people, I don't think, and we talk about this all the time. If you set a meeting and you get in and use your relationship to create business and revenue, you shouldn't feel guilty for taking a percentage of the revenue that's generated from your relationship.
Right.
And that guilt and like, should I do that? Because I always want to connect and I always want people and I always want that. Yeah. It's just hard. And there's been examples in the last couple of years where it's like, hey, I've, essentially placed people on boards and they've got equity in the company and they've exited the company with like a 30 multiple from what they came in at the value, all these things. And it's like, and I really am very happy for them. Right. There's never that like, oh, well, I should have gotten mine. But at the same time, I think as your friend helped you see, it's like, how much did I potentially leave on the table for my family to provide for them? Yeah. But that's a dance. What about from a time standpoint? And something I struggle with is wanting to say yes to everybody. How do you kind of really run through, like for you to take time today, right? You have a lot that you've got to do, but this is something that is worth my time.
Right.
And then when you do have to say no, like how do you gracefully do that to someone?
Yeah. You know what? I didn't know this was going to come up today. I want to encourage you and everybody listening. People talk about retirement in different ways, and that's great. And people, what they're going to be doing so I'm 62. I'm going to tell you guys, I'm just hitting my stride.
Yeah.
I'm just hitting my stride. And what I mean by that is when I speak to young people, college age people, whatever, I say, my relational net worth is incalculable.
Yeah, no doubt.
And it's all by the grace of God that I've got these relationships. And so the reason I bring that up is that I'm in some ways, I'm busier than I've ever been or can be busier. And so seriously, my wife and I sat down last March and it's a continuing ongoing conversation to talk about, we're in the fourth quarter, any way you want to look at it. Yeah. And so we said, what are our priorities going to be in the fourth quarter? So I don't mean to oversimplify. It's not simple ever. But I would encourage their phases. That's the other thing I tell my adult kids is life is about phases. Don't get too excited or too disappointed because it's going to change. Life is phases, and so there's times when here's the key answer though, is you've got to you got to sit down and look at your priorities when the phase changes. Okay? Because it's going to be different. You're a little bit ahead of Ben, but when your kids are in their middle school and high school years, when that starts happening, that's a different phase than it is right now. So you need to say, okay, time out, let's reprioritize for this phase. And so That has helped me say no lately, but it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
We like to say yes.
Yes. Yes.
No, man, I knew this was going to be just pure gold from the minute we started, and this has been great.
Too kind.
It actually, that's a perfect segue into what you're doing now, because you talked about you're 62 now. Not exactly what most people think of as a time to start a new job, new career. You know, it's similar to what you were doing, but it's led you to what we, wanted to talk about today is the He Gets Us campaign, which is getting all the headlines right now because of the Super Bowl ads and the millions of dollars spent and millions of dollars raised.
Playoffs before that.
Right.
I mean, the NCAA, the NCAA playoffs. And it's the last 2 to 3 months, it's been on the forefront.
Yeah, and it's getting all the headlines. So what led you to wanting to work with this organization, and what is, if for those of the people that are unfamiliar, what is He Gets Us? What's the mission overall? What's going on there?
All right, I want to take a quick minute to talk about our partner, Choctaw Casino and Resort. We are really, really humbled and grateful to be a partner for them. If you've listened to this show for any amount of time, you've heard how great the resort is there, how great the casino is, the new expansion. They've doubled in size, 3,000 new slots. They've got unbelievable sports bar. They've got unbelievable restaurants, unbelievable movie theaters, arcades for kids. It is endless, the things that they've not only improved but added. But it's just the experience that they provide is second to none. Choctaw Nation has done an incredible job with the community, with philanthropy, with support. They have just done incredible things. So we are extremely humbled and grateful to partner with Choctaw Casino and Resort. Make sure, I know you know it, but it's just a short drive up 75. Go check them out. And now back to the episode.
Yeah, so let me kind of say it one way, and then I'm going to go back to your complete question. But this momentum that you're seeing, that people are seeing, the media, is what we call the air game. So it'll help me explain it as we go through. And just so you know, it's going to be more like that in 2023, 2024, and 2025. That's the plan right now. Now, this has never been done before. What I'm about to explain is the He Gets Us campaign. It's never been done quite like this before in anything that we're aware of. And so we're learning. And talk about having to take a dose of humility every day. I mean, seriously, you guys, when we meet as a team together, we say, okay, what do we know today that we didn't know last week? It's incredible.
That fast,
yeah. So now there have been, for example, is it okay to say products on the podcast? I guess
absolutely. 100%.
So, when Apple came out with the new iPhone 14, which I don't have, but when they did, we are learning, like, how do you buy media for the entire nation that you want everybody to learn about that brand? How do you do that? How do you buy it? Now, we've got the best in the business at, Haven is a marketing firm out of Michigan that's been with us from the beginning.
Yep.
Lerma here in Dallas, Texas, downtown Dallas, LERMA, Lerma. They're actually the ones that actually produce what
content.
You see.
Yeah.
They're the ones.
Met some of those folks in Phoenix. Yeah.
Oh man, they're awesome.
Yeah.
And so we're learning from all that. But here's the deal. So it still hadn't been 2 years. March of 2021, literally a handful of families, 3 generations, a handful of families got together to just discuss, morality. You can argue that morality's been in the ditch for decades in the United States, or you can say it was worse in the 20s or whatever, but it's this rapid decline of the general morality of the United States in the last few years.
Yeah.
And started discussing that, and so they developed a problem question. You got to start somewhere, and the problem question is, how did the world's greatest love story become known as a hate group? And so the story, obviously, of Jesus that took our place, took our sins so that we can be reunited with God, our Creator. And so that's kind of how did that love story become in so many circles, especially in media, and I don't mean just I'm not blaming it on media. I'm saying, but it's social media has so rapidly increased people that really don't know the story, and yet because of maybe what Christians or more moral people have been against is why, sometimes they're saying, well, that's a hate group. Why would I want to be associated with them?
Yes.
So that was the problem question. So research was started, millions of dollars spent on nationwide research, thousands of Americans from different ethnicities, different backgrounds, different ages, around would people, basically the goal was to find out, would people be interested in learning more about Jesus? And it's just the response was phenomenal in the surveys initially, and then did a 10-week, 10-city kind of splash, which was March Madness last year. Actually, the 10-week deal was even done before March Madness, but it went so well, the response, that that's when it was like, we got to do this. We don't just need so seed money was given in the beginning, and then we needed to really start raising money and spending money, and so it's a $1 billion campaign, and thank God we got about 500, a little over 500 million so far. But so Air Game. So what you're seeing, so here's the real purpose is, on one hand, you can say we want to make Jesus the best known brand in America, but the goal number one is to raise the respect and relevancy of Jesus in the United States. That's goal number one. But the Air Game is designed, what we want to happen is action number one, when you see an ad, we want people to go to hegetsus.com. So that's action number one. Action number two is when people visit hegetsus.com, they can watch couple of dozen videos from 15 seconds to over a minute, both in English and Spanish now, all of them are. And it's about the characteristics of the man Jesus that walked the earth, what made him a great leader, what attracted people to him. So it's about that. And then it's about the things that he went through in his life on earth, because hence the name of the campaign, He Gets Us. Because he went through betrayal. He had family conflict, serious family conflict. He had he was faced with jealousy. He was faced with disappointment. He was faced with brutality. So you can go on and on. And so the point is when people go there and they watch those videos, action number two is they can raise their hand digitally, which means usually the way that started is we have a 24/7 chat room or chat space. And so people start chatting, and then they say, well, I'd rather switch to text. And so we text with them. The goal being in that, either one, we get immediately right to their cell phone, we send a 7-day Bible reading plan on fear or on anxiety or on disappointment. And so that's one way. But what we're trying to do is to keep them connected to them long enough to eventually say, hey, may we connect you to one of our ministry or church partners in your zip code.
Yeah.
So that's the Air Game. If they agree to do that and we actually connect them to, say, somebody in 75220 here in Dallas, Texas or whatever, then that begins what we call the ground game. Okay? And the ground game is what we like to call the unlimited resources of the body of Christ. So what we're trying to do with some of the money that we raise is we're making sure that every church that wants to participate, that wants to receive, we call those people explorers. So if a church or a ministry wants to receive explorers, we want to make sure that they're lacking in nothing.
Yeah.
So whether that's training or resources or teaching materials or, Celebrate Recovery or addiction ministries or counseling, Christian counseling, all kinds of things. We want every church that wants to receive explorers. And basically what that means is, first, it's a connection. You guys know, team. It's just being connected to something. And then it's make a friend. And then from that, obviously, you try to provide what they need and hopefully build a long-term relationship. And one of the guys in that founding group summarized it this way, and I'm just going to do this for people, is the whole point is we want people initially to say, hey, He gets us, He gets me. He has a story and a family, and he wants me in it.
Love it. I love. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
No.
Cheers, go.
What I love, and I wish through my lifetime and my experience with churches, the mindset was more in line with the He Gets Us campaign, because I think people that maybe aren't familiar, one with the Bible and the teachings from Jesus, is the church is not a building. The church is not a staff. It's not a denomination. The church is the people. And what I've struggled with churches is that you see them want to cannibalize their membership, and they want to hold on to them tight because the church is its own business, and that's where the revenue comes from, is from tithing. And you lose track of the overall mission. And number one is to have a relationship with Jesus. And what y'all are doing is, it's not, hey, come on in, and then we're going to ask you for something. It's, hey, come here, and then we want to encourage you to go somewhere that you can further mature your relationship with Jesus and provide resources for that. It's not holding on to them and not letting them go. I love that. And I wish, like you said, no one's done this before. I don't know anything like this. I mean, I'm sure there's maybe some smaller foundations, nonprofits, ministries that are plugging to Connect and stuff like that for more specific, but centered around Jesus, connecting out to the people, the church. I just love that.
Well, be encouraged. This, in my entire life, in the last 6 months, I've seen more cooperation and encouragement between separate, individual, whatever churches than I've ever seen. Yeah. So be encouraged. It's creating some great cooperation.
I love it. Oh,
the articles and things that the detractors, the haters, would say, there's just so many ways you can use that money. What is y'all's response to the criticism about how the money's being used?
Well, there's a couple of ways. I mean, one, remember the story in the Bible where the woman that had been forgiven much for her lifestyle came and had a very expensive jar or container of fragrant perfume ointment, and she broke it and poured it over, anointed Jesus. And remember who criticized her was the treasury keeper. Yeah.
What do you say? Could have sold that, given the money to the poor.
Right, right. So there's one example, and we're just saying that, that this effort in this world, if we're going to take on the the culture that we talked about a while ago, that it takes that kind of money to make this strategy successful. And so we feel like we're anointing Jesus with this money. So anyway, here's the other thing that I love to answer, is that all the wonderful ministries about Jesus that are out there that are being done, some we know about, millions that we don't, but also ministries of other religious groups that may not promote Jesus. Guess what this campaign is doing? It is softening the soil for everybody. This campaign it really is preparing people's hearts to receive values of people that are peaceful, people that are forgiving, people that are gracious. You talked about grace earlier in the children. That's why that first spot on the Super Bowl the other night about having childlike faith. Don't act like an adult. Be childlike. Mm-hmm. And so how do you put a value on that? You can't even value. Yes, we spent $16.5 million just on the airtime. But how do you put a value on that if the message that's going out is improving all the efforts to some extent? I don't want people to say we're trying to take too much credit. I'm just saying it's so positive to instill in people. What do you think people desire the most right now? When we survey, we have a group. That's right. We have a group called McQueen Analytics that talks to, surveys 800 people every week. and is asking them, what'd you think of the ads? What'd you think of this? What do you feel about that? And we ask them, one of my favorite questions is, why are you attracted to Jesus? Why do you want to learn more about Jesus? There's a couple of dozen answers, but the 4 most frequent, and number one, you answered it, Tyler, number one is he is peaceful. Mm-hmm. People want peace in this world. Yeah. Doesn't matter whether they live in Frisco or they live in Turkey, they want peace. Mm-hmm. And they want peace for their kids and peace for their friends. So it's peace. He was peaceful. He was approachable. You know, people are so sick and tired of the important in the world not being approachable. Forgiveness, and he loves everybody. Yeah. Those are the 4 top responses.
The criticism, it's so funny to me, and I have empathy for those that have not had a relationship with Jesus, but you criticize and say, oh, they spent so much money on an ad for Jesus. Well, I'm pretty sure Frito-Lay or Doritos spent about the same on commercials slinging chips. Mm-hmm. We're slinging eternity here. Like, what is more important to spend your money on? And so it just cracks me up. But
I'd imagine though a lot of the criticism is from believers as well. So it's not just the people that don't believe in that story. It's I'm sure the people that disagree with the method. So that is true. Yeah.
We have gotten probably more of that. Well, prior to the Super Bowl, we got more from, different parts of Christian community, but not a lot, and that's okay. Isn't it funny? Human nature. Think back when we were kids. What is it about us that when somebody else thinks of something before we do or has success in something, why don't we try to tear it down and make it not as important?
I've wondered that exactly.
Why are we like
all
that?
the time?
You're not going to get it. It's already been done. So like why do you not want them to have it? Yeah, I totally agree.
I know we got to wrap up here soon, but I'm curious, not from the He Gets perspective, but from Phil Boone's perspective. We've been talking a lot lately, and especially as we raise young kids, you know, suicide rates are up. Depression is up. All of these negative statistics are on the rise, good statistics on the decline. From your perspective, how much does purpose or potentially a lack of purpose play into, is it a correlation at all? Is it nothing to do with it at all? Like, what is your perspective on maybe a sense of, are we losing our sense of purpose as a culture? What do you think about that idea?
Before I answer that question, I got to give you one more saying because it's one of your favorites. Oh, yeah? Before we forget it, so you will remember I didn't do my oldest son's wedding. It wasn't the officiant, but I wrote a letter and read it. And one of the lines, I actually have it copyrighted now because the response was so good from it. But so this is to both of you guys, all you husbands out there. And so kiss her good morning, kiss her goodbye, kiss her hello, kiss her good night every day.
Every day. Yeah, I remember you said that at Jason's wedding. It stuck with me. That was 6 years ago now. Yeah, it stuck with me every day.
Well, 2015. So what's that? 7 years.
7 years ago. Goodness. Wow.
Yeah. That's awesome. So
8 years ago.
Here's maybe just a minute.
I'll answer your question.
Oh yeah. So sorry.
I think it is the question of the day. If you think about it, when we're born or at some point, you got to answer the question, who am I and why am I here? And quite frankly, how much do you hear anywhere where that answer is being talked about, or wiser, older, experienced people are helping provide that answer? You just don't hear it much.
Right.
Who am I and why am I here? Mm-hmm. So it's natural, by the way.
Yeah.
Every child on the planet is going to ask those two questions at some point.
Well, it seems the message is confusing now more than ever. We can't even agree on gender. We can't even agree on, there's just so many conflicting messages out there that no wonder kids are confused. Mm-hmm. No wonder they're losing this sense of purpose. They don't, Well, all the traditional value, not all of them, but many traditional values are just being blown up and disregarded. And as a young man, when you were growing up and before, it was to be the leader of the household, to lead my family. And now it's like, well, now that makes you a misogynist if you think that way. Or women, their role, and again, hate on us if you want, but traditionally the role is to raise the kids and stay in the home and lead the home. Mm-hmm. And now it's, well, no, women need to go out and build a career. And that's great. I hope they do. But it can be confusing when you lose these traditional senses of purpose. And I think that's a big part of why we're seeing the confusion that we see today.
Well, we had a discussion months back, and I think, Ben, it's the purpose, but I think that can be interchangeable to truth. Like, what is our truth? We don't have any truths because everyone has their own truth now, and that's encouraged. And you serve yourself, and that's it. And everything is of self, and that's opposite of the truth of the one book that has not yet been proven to be not true. So when the only foundational truth that we have is a book that has never been disproven, and we disregard it, I think that's where you lose this sense of purpose. And you lose, because what do we lean on? We lean on something that just blows in the wind and changes day by day. I'm not going to speak for everyone. I can't trust myself. Like, if I were just to lean on my own truth, there's no chance.
Right.
Maybe if you're okay, wrap up with this. And Ben usually is always like the last question. So he may come back with another one that's better. But maybe just to those from just a ministry moment and just sharing your heart is, there's people out there that don't know Jesus or have gone to church and think they do. And some that are just like, I don't know if he's real. Like, I don't know if he is. Mm-hmm. And it kind of hit me when you mentioned peace is the number one thing people are looking for. Mm-hmm. So what would you say to those that just really just question if there's a God and question Jesus's validity and existence?
Mm-hmm.
It's an easy question to answer.
Yeah, I know.
You got what's the joke? You got 30 seconds to answer.
And go.
Right. Hit the button. Reminds me of an old joke, but we won't go there. Man, one thing that jumps out to me, and you kind of led into it just a moment ago by saying that, if I'm in charge, if Phil Boone has all the knowledge and wisdom that I need on my own, man, we're in deep trouble. So I guess what I would say is that it's okay to look within or look in your heart or whatever and say who's on. This is one way to express it, and because it comes from the Bible, is who's on the throne of your heart. Somebody's in charge. And if you want to be in charge, if you like the results, as long as you've been in charge, then I guess keep plugging. Why would you change? But, man, I know the difference between, because I've lived and still have to make that decision every day, but I've lived where I tried to be on the throne of my heart, and I've lived with Jesus on the throne, and there's just no difference. Mm-hmm. No difference in peace. I mean, the peace and the calmness and the rest. That's the other thing, guys. I hope your listeners out there, are you exhausted? Yeah. Maybe in every way exhausted. Your mind is just exhausted. Man, there is peace and rest only in Jesus. And that's the thing. Ben, you mentioned identity. And I'd say, where are you going to find your identity? Who are you going to let? This is it. Who are you going to let tell you who you are? Who's going to give you your identity? Or who's going to tell you what you're worth? Man, I choose, and I pray that everybody listening chooses to say, I want Jesus to give me my worth because he sacrificed it all for me by choice. Here's the deal. and you guys, since you both have, and it can be children, doesn't have to be just sons. But can you imagine, seriously, fathers, can you imagine saying, I'm going to sacrifice Jason for a bunch of people that I don't even know? Well, God knows everybody, but for a bunch of people that don't care about me. Am I going to do that? So man, thank you for the opportunity, guys. It's been a true blessing. I'm embarrassed, Ben, because of our relationship. We just talked about a whole lot about me, and that's humbling.
No, that's exactly what I was hoping for.
Well,
no, I told you before. Hopefully, because I know your kids are going to be listening, hopefully they learned something about their dad today. Yeah. I'd love that more than anything. If they, and again, you were an unbelievable father, and I know they love you to death, but it would be awesome if they were like, man, I didn't know that. That's really cool. That's really cool with my dad.
Thank
so, hegetsus.com or .org.
Yes.
.com.
Hegetsus.com.
First step, just go there.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's the website. I know you guys had an amazing response. You're still getting the numbers in, but you had an amazing response from the Super Bowl, which is really cool to hear. So,
and we need everybody on the team. Everybody that thinks this is a great idea, go to hegetsuspartners.com.
I was just going to ask how
churches
people
can sign up,
okay.
or you can sign up. Your small group can sign up.
Churches can sign up.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
And we need, yes, we've raised a lot of money, but we need, if you like this idea, help us provide the fuel to make it continue. So look forward to the opportunity to get you on the team.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. No, I appreciate it so much. Again, I said it from the beginning. You mean a lot to me personally, and I appreciate you for everything you've done for me. I mean, literally since I was 13, 14 years old. So I appreciate you so much.
It's been a joy.
Yeah. Thank you.